Talk Like That, a monthly podcast by Mark Byron Dallas. Episode 1, August 2020. Hi, this is Mark Dallas. Today I'll be talking to an actor who was the first professional TV and film actor I'd ever met since arriving in Canada in 2002. Like myself, he's an immigrant. He was born in Wisconsin, United States, and his acting career has taken him around the world to places including Hollywood and London in England, where he did much of his training. He now spends most of his time in Toronto, where he himself trains people in acting, he coaches, and also continues to show up in things like TV shows, movies, usually playing rough-edged, aggressive thugs, which is ironic, really, because John is the friendliest, chattiest guy you could ever hope to meet. That's probably why he has so many friends, many of whom you are sure to have heard of. The sound quality of this interview wasn't optimum, as firstly, it was conducted online on Zoom, and secondly, it was before I rigged up my sound booth. Consequently, I sound like I was speaking from the bathroom, when in reality I was actually set up on the landing outside the bathroom. John talks about how he started off in acting and compares the different fields he's worked in. You'll notice a couple of times during the interview I quizzed John on how well he remembered the shows he'd been in. Considering how many there are, his memory is quite impressive, and he has an anecdote to recount for each one. But John isn't just a storyteller. He shares with us many technical tidbits from decades of experience and training, including finding the voice of a long-dead inventor, witnessing at first hand the 2-minute process of a Hollywood actor getting into character, and refining his Russian accent with Russian friends whose own life stories you'll hear are beyond the ordinary. Oh, and just one more thing. I should mention that this podcast does contain some offensive language, and some of you may be surprised to hear that none of it is mine.
So I'm here with John Tench, the actor, and he's been in Schitt's Creek, Killjoys, Murdoch Mysteries, American Gods, as well as movies like The Colony and a whole bunch of other stuff. You've got so many IMDb credits, it's too much to get through. I don't want to spend like 5 minutes going through all the stuff you've done, but you've been doing it a while, eh?
Yes. Yes, I have. They've thrown me a lot of parts and bones through the years. It's one of the advantages, I guess, of being a character actor is I get to swim in a lot of different pools, work in a lot of different genres.
Swimming in a pool sounds great to me right now because the water out there is steaming.
I know. I got a chance to get to the lake the other day, and everything's like warm, right? So it's like 25 degrees. You jump in, and it's like
Yeah, I saw your Facebook post. That's
right. Oh, yes. Yeah, that was
a slow-mo of you diving into the lake.
It was actually I wasn't aware that my friend Liam Owen, who's a young filmmaker actor, a great guy. I wasn't aware he was recording it at the time, but and then he did he put it to, I think it was like Chariots of Fire or something. He put it to that grandiose.
After a few more minutes of chatting, I decided to come out with one of my quiz questions.
In which animated series has your voice appeared in the most number of episodes?
Wow, good question. There's a few, but one of the funniest ones is Sonic the Hedgehog. I played Sharky, Robotnik's lawyer. Was a bit of a wise guy, had a kind of snappy, sharp voice like that. It's 56 episodes, I think I did.
And I've got to hear that you're in 65.
Okay, at 65, okay, yeah.
65.
Mixed them with my brain.
Do you prefer doing like voice work like that, or do you prefer movies or TV shows?
I like it all, to be honest, Mark. I've always considered myself I tried to, as I was training, I became the well-rounded actor. Started out in theater, which requires a lot of different voices, different characters and things like that. My dad was great. We used to play around with, Monty Python and all those great voices. And we all had those albums. And even like the Smothers Brothers, but those guys, Natty Seagum, and all those guys, and Beyond the Fringe, and Peter Kirk, Dudley Moore, incredibly talented.
They were amazing.
Some of the early Terry Niven and a lot of those British actors, film and stage actors, would often lend their voices to the radio albums and things. And of course, British radio drama, huge history there. So I think, going back to the question, it was starting in theater, but then realizing, and especially now in 2020, I've always prided myself on trying to stay on top of the latest technology, whether it was, you can get work in cartoons. Oh, okay, what do I need? And then booking a few cartoons, and then that leads to the next, to the next, to the next. And then suddenly, lo and behold, about 2007, 2008, early Splinter Cell, the early video games, when they first started using actors instead of voice technicians, and like, we just need a scary voice, man. And get out of the car, motherfucker. And then we started getting more and more sophisticated. So I started auditioning for like early Splinter Cell, some of the Grand Theft Auto, but again, the GTA, unfortunately, for a long time, they stayed non-union. And then gradually they started realizing around 2010, 2011, that especially Ubisoft was the trailblazer in this, using union actors because they got better voice. And as the games got more sophisticated, they needed the acting to be more sophisticated. They had these like monster scripts for the cinematics, like 220 pages. And it took them a while to realize that, we have to learn this stuff, guys. You can't just, and there's no reading it off the page or having prompt sheets or anything like that. So gradually they started realizing, and they gave more time to us to break down the scripts and to learn them. Uh-huh. And then it's basically like it's like doing a play. So you're in the volume with all the cameras around you, and you start at the beginning.
You've got all the black dots on your face, and
on your head. Like, the head cams are getting a lot more friendly, but at the beginning they had to screw them on and tighten them. And you were like this kind of. It's a very flexible suit. It's like a sport, like a luge suit, and you have to be very careful about if one of the dots goes off, then it puts off the skin drawings, right, and all the animation. So it's highly technical, but then again, it's such a great challenge because it's like, that's what I do as an actor. That's what my job is, right? Is to figure out the blocking, figure out the beats, figure out the units, figuring out my motivation. And so I don't think I have a preferred. I mean, feature films, you've got a luxury where there's more time, there's more money. They try to do less setups. You spend a lot of time in your trailer or, hanging out. Television is great because it's a lot faster. Like, in film you do maybe 5 or 6 setups a day, and TV you do 50, 60. So there's no time to sit around. There's no time to waste. So that I like that aspect. I love doing theater just because of the visceral connection, the roar of the grease paint and smell of the cloud. Or you're doing 8-10 hour days and getting up early, and it's very physical. So it's a whole other, like, again, a set of challenges that, or the old Peter O'Toole thing, that I'm a movie star, I'm not an actor. Like, I'm not used to this. And that's why I think, ultimately people always go back to stage too, right? Like Bryan Cranston and Tatiana Maslany right now doing Network on Broadway, or not right now because of COVID, but that's Bryan Cranston.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And he doesn't have to do that. He's like multi-millionaire.
Exactly. You've been in a few Christmas movies, right?
Yes, I have.
Which Christmas movie did you play a mugger?
Oh, I believe I've got this one. It was Home for Christmas.
It was Home for Christmas, yeah. You're also in Christmas Inheritance as Baxter, Christmas on Division Street as Grimes, and Christmas with Tucker as Tom Turner.
Yes. Christmas with Tucker I don't, because James Brolin is such a nice guy and I had no reason to beat him up. But I was the guy who wrecked Christmas. Or tried to, well.
So you're kind of like you're like a proto Grinch.
Yes. But the thing with beating up Mickey Rooney, what a doll. Mickey, by that point, had done a lot of movies. He was near the end of his career. Fighting spirit. And like in Night at the Museum and stuff, where he plays that little cantankerous. And he was a bit of that, In Home for Christmas, I was supposed to beat him up and leave him like damaged in the gutter. And he comes out and he looks me up and down and he goes, "Yeah, you could probably take me, but I think it'd be better if I get a couple of takes." And he changed the scene so that he ends up beating me up. But that wasn't his script. And what are you going to do?
Well, it's Mickey Rooney. Like if Mickey Rooney wants to beat you up and he puts it in the scene. Put him up.
The funniest experience, man. You're right. And last little story about that, my dad and my mom on driving down to Florida, and they were staying at some motel. I was in the bathroom. My dad turned on the TV. "Yeah, come quick, John's on television with Mickey Rooney." My dad never let me live that I beat up Mickey Rooney.
Oh.
So Dad, he beat me.
Well, yeah. You're typecast a little bit as a bit of a bad boy. You get to beat people up and so on, but the other thing is, I know that you have been killed on screen 59 times. So you're also typecast as kind of a dying guy.
And counting.
And counting. Now, 50, no, the thing is, it's not just that, but 59 times on screen beats Sean Bean, who has only been killed like 21 times on screen so far. So you have been killed more than twice as many times.
He almost got killed a lot in Sharp's War, but he always manages to get away from the bullet, the fatal bullet. It doesn't quite.
Otherwise, there'd be no more episodes.
That's amazing.
Out of your 59 deaths, what's your favorite ones?
Wow. Well, I think they like to kill me, and often my characters go, "Okay, I'm playing such a bad guy. I hope this guy dies." But there's a thing about a death scene which is so neat. And in research as an actor, from an early age as an actor, I played some pretty dramatic death scenes, and I always like to be in for the stunt. Like I always ask if the stunt isn't too crazy. And on my reel, you've seen a couple of my death scenes. I took at one point 15 squibs, like 8 down one side, 8 down another, 7 down the other. And I was the actor at that time that had taken the most squibs as a standing actor, not a stunt guy or not a photo double. And it was exciting. It was fun. It was like, so favorite death scenes, there's been many. The more spectacular is fun, but the most recent one was a lot of fun was Lawrence Fishburne. Spoiler, kills me in stand-up. And big Lawrence Fish. I've worked with Lawrence a couple of times too. And he kicked with the day we met on set. I was coming down the hill in the cemetery, and he's coming out of his shuttle, and he comes walking towards me, and from about 30 feet away, he goes, "Johnny," and I said, "Hey, Lawrence, how are you, Fish?" And he goes, "I'm gonna have to kill you again, man." And, so I thought, I can't think of who I'd rather be shot by on this lovely morning. And the one with Dolph Lundgren in Icarus, he released it as
Killing Machine.
Killing Machine.
He prefers
Icarus.
He hates the name Killing Machine, though.
No, I know. And usually what Dolph wants, Dolph gets, kind of thing.
Right.
But
yeah, of course. Dolph Lundgren.
What a great experience working with him on that, man.
Most of the characters in that are Russian, right?
Yeah.
So there's you, an American Canadian playing a Russian. There's Dolph Lundgren, the Swedish dude playing a Russian, and some other Swedish actor playing a Russian. Were there any Russian actors?
There were a couple. Sasha Mandra, Alexander Mandra. It's funny because that goes back to the death scene where I've played Russians. All the Russians I've played all die violently in a hail of bullets or, shot multiple times. So there's a big Russian community out in New West. A lot of these guys came during Glasnost and Petroskaya. Like one of my good friends, Taras, and he's a great stunt guy. He jumped off a merchant ship in 94, 95, I think, around that time when after Yeltsin and Russia kind of opened up for a little bit, and a lot of people left the country.
So when you say he jumped off a merchant ship,
Actually,
it wasn't a stunt.
No, in English Bay.
In the movie, he actually jumped off a merchant ship.
Like 60 feet.
That's badass.
Into the waters of English Bay.
Oh my God.
swam to the Sunset Beach in the West End there, got out, walked up the street, dried himself off, right, and just walked into Vancouver, and then became a stunt guy, became an actor, and said, "I'm going to make it in this town, and I'm going to make it so that I can bring my wife and my brother over," which he did. So long story short, but a lot of Russians in Vancouver. So somebody was like, "So who got the part of Norvid?" And they were like, "John Tench." John Tench? But he's not even fucking Russian. I think he's got he's Slavic, Tenka. He's like Romanian or something. I don't know. And then, so I always got teased by the Russians, but I ended up with so many great Russian friends that shepherded me through things. So I have a lot of fun doing the Russians, but I get very serious about it. I've researched the different zones. Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan is a different accent, closer to the Tatar. Moscow always got the plummy kind of like sort of the British toffs, right, where they talk on the back of the throat and a lot of room in the cheeks. So the Muscovites, so they say, because the Moscow is very, very big, very poetic, very, the highs are high and the lows are a bitch. Suka. So then gradually I think I played 5 or 6 Russians to this point. And so whenever I find an accent that interests me, then I go deep into researching it. And one of the great tools nowadays, like in the old days, we used to have to go to the library and, or hopefully you had a Russian friend who you could talk to. And they're really hard ass because, as a coach too, you could be, you don't buy it sometimes. And it's like, no. And even Taras was like, I'd go, okay, smatri za nimi. No, smatri za nimi. That's what I'm saying. Smatri za nimi. No, you're smatri. You're saying smatri.
Like getting the subtleties of those consonants, yeah.
Yeah. And then I sort of realizing, and even when my sister always teases from that movie, his way of saying shut up was shut up. So we have a little family thing where he goes, shut up! And I said, well, you know how you say shut up. It's shut up. And he goes, that's what I say, shut up. Which is a weird argument. And you can't, no, I'm saying shut up. And he would hear the T even though his mouth was forming an R, right? So I tend to look a lot at vocal apparatus. You meet coaches who they look at you, they hear you do the thing, and they say, yeah, remember your facial mask is a machine, right? And you can make it act for you if you gotta send your thing up into a soft palate to get that Mexicano thing, because they always tend to go up air to the nose, whereas the Castellano Spaniards don't do that. They speak from
it's more like this.
Yes. So I think, wherever you find that accent, just like slipping into a suit of clothes. But I love it. But funnily enough, Mark, I think it's the Brits who can sometimes be very, I say, judgmental.
They're judgmental.
They're just very specific about stuff. And because I lived in England for 4 or 5 years, right, and I studied at Atlanta and the British American Academy, and they put me through my paces, right, and I was like, but the reason of coming all that, because as a Canadian actor studying in London, you always had to fight through those ranks of the great British actors who were like, Canadians are good comics, yes, very good at comedy, right? And so,
I've seen Kids in the Hall,
Richard III, but it was on and it's an ongoing gag with Tommy Reed on Murdoch Mysteries. Tommy is one of those guys who goes, okay, give me your best Liverpudlian, because he's Mancunian, right?
All right, is man, all right, yeah.
And I said, oh yeah, I could hear it.
Top man.
Manchester, and he goes, what's that? And I said, that's me doing a Manchester, just like you.
Manchester.
Goes, that's not a fucking Manchester accent. and
having a laugh at you, mate.
He teases me, he rides me because I'm doing Alexander Campbell, right? That's a weird accent too.
How deep did you go with that? Like, in terms of research, how did you go about finding his voice? Had you at that point heard his voice on that wax cylinder or whatever? Because it's out there.
I know.
At that point?
And when I first did it, that recording came onto YouTube, I think, after I'd first done the role. And I'd done a lot of research, a lot, which I always do, especially for when you're doing a bio of somebody, a biography.
Yeah.
you obviously have to get it right. And Murdoch is funny because they don't want to be too specific with history. Like they tend to.
Yeah, well, they get a bit steampunky when it comes to history.
A little bit,
right?
yeah. The quandary was that Murdoch Mysteries, because they're tied in with British producers, they said, we really liked your voice, but where did it come from? And I said, after having done my research, Alexander Graham Bell was a Scot who was raised by elocutionists.
Exactly.
His father and his uncle were both elocutionists. So they didn't beat the Scot out of him, but they pushed the Scot down.
It was completely suppressed, yeah.
And they basically, so it was some of the early RP, and that's why I say RP is ultimately elocution and elucidation and all of that kind of stuff, enunciation. And so, and then Alexander Graham Bell was also, because he was into vocalized speech, he wasn't into sign language. He didn't believe in sign because he thought that separated deaf people from society, and deaf people could function in society if they could read lips.
Like his wife read lips, right? So, yeah.
So he was very much into that, talking with a clear voice and making sure he could be heard. But then, and they said, we don't want him to go Scot.
Yes,
like there isn't. And I was like, but he did. And when he moved to Bedeck, they called him Valerid, right? So by the time he got to England, and then he moved to Canada when he was like 1920 to get rid of his lung condition, he had tuberculosis. They lived in Bradford, which was a very British community. And then he moved to Boston, which at that time, that Boston flat, really hadn't developed yet. It was still very much a British colony at that time, 1890.
So it hadn't gone pack the can have it yet.
Yeah, that came later. That came through the 1900s and stuff. And it's actually very interesting hearing a New Zealander talk about this, how it's that first generation born, and then the second generation, the people that grow up, they don't want to sound like their parents, so they sound like everybody sounds in the schoolyard. And if everybody sounds like them in the schoolyard, then you start developing those vocal patterns to get, those words out. So then with Alexander Graham Bell, it was great because I love this kind of detail. I love the specificity. So then every so often I'd let the brogue creep in. And he'd say, especially in his R's, he found it really hard not to roll his R's. The future is in kites, ladies and gentlemen. So on the end of words, like he tend to trill his R. And you hear that in that wax cylinder recording when he, and finally I found the recording. I'm like, oh, great. And what is he doing? He's counting to 1,000.
100, 200, 300, 400, 500, 600, 700, 800, 900, 1,000.
It's like what I thought of when I listened to that, I thought, he sounded very English, but then there was the way he said 5. Like, it was just a certain way. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, that was it. Yeah, 5. So it was like, that's where the Scot was spoken through there.
You got it, man. And I took that to the producers, to Cal Coon. I said, Cal, listen to this. And this is the voice of Alexander Graham Bell. And he does it on the 3 too. He goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then he goes at 1,000, 2,000. And he's got that plumbing, that elocuted plumminess, but at the same time, and every so often, and so I put that into it every so often, like what I have been working on a craft. Right, me and a group of like-minded young men have been working on a craft that will be able to travel across the water at 100 miles an hour.
Right? That's great. One thing I noticed as well was that in that recording, he doesn't say half. Like a Scot would always say $2.50, right? He says half. Half. Yeah, he says half. Yes.
Dollars.
$45.5.
Yes, and even when he says, "This is the voice," it's always got that rhetorical British elocutionary way of speaking.
Yes.
You heard with guys like,
but that's the other. I think you put your finger on it. Is that when he was recording it, he was putting that elocutionary $2.50. He was putting that on, right? Because he's thinking, I am making history on this wax cylinder. And so, but when he's speaking to people at the convention, is more likely to go a little bit more, probably.
I think, and probably, and supposedly in reading in most of the books I've read, when he got excited, he'd go back into it, and he was quite a passionate man. Like, I tried to bring that into Murdoch Mysteries because he'd often fly off the handle, and he was one of these hypoglycemics where he'd forget to eat, and that's why he became this big Santa Claus kind of by the end of his life, which I'm working on the part, but I guess. But I, it's so wonderful. Like, the Brits have given us that. I mean, because they kept that rhetoric study that the Romans had, that speech making. Like, and so when I think of Winston Churchill, of course, and his lovely way of putting out his phrases, and
we'll bite them on the features.
Yeah, and even his one-liners. No, Harold, it's just that every time you see something big, you insist on nationalizing it. Like that kind of going down at the end of the phrase for certain effect, and then up, and then down again. Blood, sweat, tears, and toil, and then more blood, sweat, tears, and toil. Who was it that made me think of Alexander Graham Bell too? And I sort of went to him a little bit. Was the appeaser.
Neville Chamberlain.
Yeah, I hold in my hand a piece of paper.
Yes, and
I spoke to Chancellor Hitler.
Yes.
There will be peace in our time.
In our time, yes. And they all had that way of... That's what I loved about the King's Speech, that I thought Colin Firth did such an amazing job on bioing that voice, from even the W's, like the weird little w that he has. It's a British. I think it's an upper class thing. It's sort of like Walter Wabbit, where they have
So it's yeah. I think in linguistics it's called labio. It's a labiodental approximant.
Right. They can't say they are. It comes out like Wabbit.
Wabbit. Yeah. So it's not a
so subtle.
Almost a v, but the teeth don't touch the lower lip.
Yeah, and it comes out. I had a Welsh. My Welsh godmother had that, where she would, all of her R's would be soft R's. So like, run along now, run along back home now.
There's a very famous historian, a young woman she's on a BBC show. She does a lot of stuff. You know her?
Lucy Worsley. Yeah, Lucy Worsley.
Yeah.
And she dresses
she
up.
has the same thing.
Yes. And that's what I was saying, because she's got a bit of a toff to her. She's got, well educated. Maybe she went to Eton or something, but she has that cute way of doing it. It's either it must be an underbite, right? Because that's sometimes, if I want to go into that upper class thing, if I push my bottom jaw forward a bit, not too much, but to get that sort of Prince.
You're a rascal.
Yeah, and then it's harder to say.
Ridiculous. Yes.
It was a terrible, terrible time.
You've done all this bad boy stuff. You've been killed. You've been put in the chair. You've had your demon spirit exorcised by an angel. You've been shot with a blunderbuss. You came close to death as a Viking. You were involved in killing 50% of your crew, getting them to kill each other before you finally stabbed yourself in the eye and burnt one of your crewmen. After all this, do you think there's a chance you might go into comedy?
Well, there's two things. One, sometimes my agent reminds casting that, yes, John does do comedy. Just look at his reel. And I came out of comedy, like where my comedy chops were was in the theater more than in film and TV, because film and TV, casting directors, they bring you in, you typecast, you play one bad guy, you know, you're gonna play others if they like what you did. It's funny because in theater I always played the heroes and a lot of comedy, and in film I always played the villain or the psycho or the mouth breathing guys who don't do shit because there's no consequence. It's like, Joey, you can't do that. Why the fuck not? Because you're gonna go to jail. You know, so somebody's gonna die. So what are you telling me? You're not doing it? No, because somebody's gonna die. What are you fucking talking about? Not, you're not making sense. You know, those kind of guys, they just don't get past that wall, right? So those guys are fun to play. They're easy to play because they're not deep. Having the ability to sort of be able to do that and then find joy in that, and play those kind of characters where you're suddenly in a movie and they're like, oh, can you do this? And of course I can do it. And you know, I'm an actor. Because one of the things they did to us in the 90s in LA, you had to have a comedy reel and a drama reel. Mm-hmm. Because supposedly casting was like, well, is he funny? Is he a dramatic actor or is he a funny actor? And it's like, well, he's both.
Right.
And they
usually go as one of the
especially same with the Canadians. They couldn't, like, it's like you're either Mike Myers or you're Gordon Pinsent. And in Canada, we go back and forth all the time. And so many times throughout my life, I've been brought into those situations where it's a goofy, oddball comedy. And I play the goofy bad guy or the funny weirdo or the funny bad guy. The show we worked on with Michael Eklund, with Carrie Scoglin, again directed Endgame. And I had a polar bear, and they got kidnapped by a rock and roll, this Michael Eklund playing this rock and roll superstar who wanted to eat polar bear steaks. So I sold him my polar bear, and then the whole thing turns into a funny little weird comedy. But it was a comedy. And when Carrie brought me in, it was kind of like, oh no, John does comedy, and they were like, really? Oh, so I had made a comedy reel and a dramatic reel, because you kind of they get one side of you and then they can't see that other side of you when you run into a bunch of buddies at an audition. And I always found that the difference between Canada and America, one of them is, you know, the chance at the brass ring for sure. But I remember an American friend of mine, you go into LA and you're in the room and everybody's kind of like, you're like paratroopers all lined up along the wall, and everybody's kind of just in their thing, just thinking and looking. And he goes, up in Canada, you walk into a casting room, you guys are all talking about the barbecue, fucking weekend where you bought each other last.
The cottage.
If you don't get this part, I hope you know.
The lake.
He goes, what are you talking about? They're the enemy, man. They're the fucking competition. This is an $80,000 contract. Yeah. Well, either I get it or he gets it. I mean, it's not, you know, we're not going to not get it because we're convincing in the audition lounge. And he goes, well, maybe. So that was one interesting thing. Like in LA, you do that outside after the audition. You meet, and everybody's always like, and I'm like that too, right? Because you want to talk to people about stuff. I don't want to give away the secrets and stuff, of course, but in Canada, I even have things where you run the scene with somebody else, and some guys are like, I'd rather just, you know, stay in my own headspace in the zone. But if you want to run lines, it's like, fuck, man, why not? They're either going to give it to you or give it to me. And I like that about Canadian casting. They never bring 5 of the same guys into the room. Whereas in LA, you're all the lookalike. You know, you're all the Jeff Bridges lookalike or the Josh Brolin lookalike, and everybody's
Viggo
sitting.
Mortensen lookalike.
Yeah, we've all got our hair parted on we've all got square jaws, got the little dimple in the chin, and we're all pretty much the same guy. And I've heard casting directors only go, I don't know, just give me the guy with what's the recent most biggest credit. And then you're like, the acting doesn't matter. Yeah, well, they were all great. You know, they can all do it. I just can't make up my mind. You want to flip a coin? And when it comes down to that, you're like, oh my God. A linguistic research aspect is something that really fascinates me in terms of the shape of the jaw, the shape of the tongue, because I think in all those early tapes that we grew up with in the 60s and 70s, they all forgot about that. Right? It was like, you know, and they give you this really generic kind of broad thing. Whereas these days with with internet, you can usually go to. I don't go to the accent tapes. I go to actual people from that place talking about.
There's a brilliant website called IDEA. It's International Dialect.
Yeah, one of the teachers at our school uses it.
There's another one. There's a speech accent archive as well.
Mhm.
That's got quite a few, and we're talking about like international accents.
Yeah,
Just use those
as a kind of a database, because you know, and back in the old days when we used to be able to do, we were allowed to do even Japanese accents, and you know, I had to do a Korean New Jersey gangster once, and I was some guys this. You know, affirmative casting and stuff, but you can't find a Korean in LA.
Yeah, I know, like what?
Biggest Koreatown in America, and they're like, no, but we can't get the Korean doing the Jersey accent. And so I did this kind of Joe Pesci thing, and then I put Korea on top of that, and did this thing, which ended up being like Dr. Kemp,
Okay.
right? He goes, "Hey, you motherfucker!
Yeah,
See you later, gay boys." From Michael.
Yeah, Kim Jong Un. Is it Team America?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, the one with Matt Damon. Team America. Yeah. It was so great, but like Gary Oldman, Tom Hardy. Oh my God! Like Tom Hardy, when I first saw him in Warriors, I was like, no, you know, the New York, the guy from Brooklyn, Tom Hardy. No, he's British. I was no, that's not the other guy. The tough brother. The New Yorker. He goes, John, it's Tom Hardy. He's British. And I was like, oh my fucking God. Like, you know, but I always know the Brits do great accents. And that was why I went there. One reason why I wanted to study in Britain, because I think that's where the best actors are created.
Hugh Laurie started doing House.
Yeah.
And all the Americans thought he was actually an American actor. I'm like, oh,
yeah.
who's this? And then they see him in interviews from like when his comedy days, when he
Mhm.
used to work with Stephen Fry. And it's like, how come the dude is putting on an English accent? And it's like, well, you know he's British, right?
He's actually
like, what? This
Yeah.
dude is British?
Yeah.
Yeah,
And even people on the show, certain actors on the show weren't aware of it, but because he's not one of those guys who stays in it. He goes, I do it. You know, they say 2 minutes. Heath Ledger was another one like that.
He code switches all the time.
Yeah, when I worked with Heath on Brokeback, and they always say Heath always stays in character, but you know, I worked with him and he'd be like, you know, and he has that British Australian accent. He doesn't have like a prod. He's just like, you know, one of these. It's like he does in Knight's Tale, right? He's just kind of got that low, sexy, warm voice kind of thing, you know, British voice, but just like, hey, John, how's it going, Johnny? Right on. And then they'd go 2 minutes, Heath, and one of the 80s would go, Heath, 2 minutes. He goes, sorry, man, they always give me a 2 minute just to get into it. Just then they walk away. And then he'd walk away, and I'd watch him go from Heath, just Heath, steady, kind of a little bit, you know, neurotic a little bit. But, and then he'd his body would just start to morph into this, Ennis, I'll get you, I got you. I'm just wondering what we're all talking about. I'm just wondering if you got me. Okay. Yeah, let's shoot this. And it was literally watching this transformation. He was always there in the kind of place, but then watching him transform, and he'd speak out loud to get the voice going. He goes, yeah, I'm looking at you, man. So, you know, a cigarette there. I'll fucking have a drink. Maybe I'm mosey on down here and just shit up. And then you'd see him be in it. And then he'd go, and he'd signal the first would be looking at him and go, okay, guys, we're ready. And Heath would just walk on the set. It's me and Ennis. You know, he's like Ennis. And then he'd talk to you like that. He'd talk to you as Ennis in the scene. And then they'd call cut. And then we'd walk away and he'd still be Ennis. And he'd be talking to people like in that voice. And then at the end, we got it. Okay, moving on, folks. And then he'd be back, and then he'd be Heath again. Got that? Everybody happy? Yeah, let's move on. And I found the Australians are like that. I know Russell Crowe is like that too. We're close to him, not with him, but seeing him in action, and he turns it on and off. Like when he was Maximus, right? He'd be lots of crow in between scenes, right? The fucking bother boy. Hi guys, what are we doing tonight? Very good.
Straight to Maximus of the
Yeah, because he's
30th
got that
Legion
song, hasn't it? That Australian.
Roman army.
Yeah, he's a Sydney boy, right? He's got that fucking bother boy, like rude boy thing, and then he turned into Maximus, and he just sinks, and suddenly becomes Maximus. And so, like, I think it's the ease of passage that when we can do voices and can do dialects, if you can find that ease of passage to fall into it, and then you just stay in it, and everybody's kind of awed by it, but it's kind of like, well, that's what we do, which is what I consider comedy as well. Because comedy, I just turn it up a bit. It's like that amp in Spinal Tap.
Okay. Yeah, switch it up to 11.
Yes, exactly.
John Tench, the legend, thank you so much for coming on to Talk Like That. It's been a pleasure.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Mark. But it's a sincere pleasure, man. And best of luck with future interviewees. So all power to you, man.
Take care and stay safe.
Thank you so much. All the best.
Thanks.
Talk soon,
Bye.
man. Bye for now.
Well, that's it for episode 1. Thanks for listening. In episode 2, I'll be talking to Hadley Kay, the voice of media giant Rogers, on how he was rescued by Superman, played alongside the littlest hobo, and what it was like growing up with a school pal who went on to become an A-list Hollywood celebrity. I hope you'll be tuning in. Until then, goodbye. If you'd like to stay updated about future episodes of Talk Like That, and you'd like to see links to interesting and informative articles and videos of the kind of stuff we talk about in the podcast, or if you have related articles to share with us, join the Talk Like That Together Facebook group. The theme music for Talk Like That is Antarctica by Audionautics and is licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution license.